Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Ok Zoomer. I'm your host, Aaron Lichtig, Xometry guy and former Jeopardy champion. And I'm excited to be here today with Aaron Moncur. Now, Aaron is the CEO of Pipeline Design and Engineering, a company that partners with your engineering team to translate user needs into mechanical requirements and create turnkey test fixtures. And he has filled a variety of roles at the company, everything from sales and business development to design engineering to product management. And he is also the host of the Being an Engineer podcast. So, Aaron, thank you for joining. We're excited to have you here.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Love to talk to someone with my same name. That never sounds weird at all, right?
Yeah, I think this is the first time we've had two Aarons on the show at the same time.
Yeah. Did I hear you say that you were a Jeopardy champion as well?
That's right. Yes, I have won a game on Jeopardy.
I'm gonna have to hold myself back from being, the podcast guest role and let you take the reins. But that I would love to dig into that one of these days.
Well, before we dig into that, I wanted to ask you some questions about the Being an Engineer podcast. So, how did that get started?
I am part of an organization called EO, or Entrepreneurial Organization, and it's kind of a business development group where there are mentors that help you figure out how to be a business owner. And I kind of just fell into being a business owner. That wasn't really the plan from the beginning, but that's where I found myself, and so I needed to learn how to be a business owner. So at the beginning of the whole COVID-19 thing, so back in late February, early March, my mentor at EO says to me, I want you to go through this exercise and think about what would happen if you had to completely restart your business because COVID just decimates it. You're back to starting from scratch. What would you do? And I thought, that's such an interesting question. And I spent several hours thinking about that and thought to myself, what is it about my job, about engineering, that I really like doing? And I came up with a few things that are of particular interest to me. One was having the chance to talk to small groups of people and understand their needs and kind of how they work and how they go about being productive in their role as engineers. I also realized that I don't dislike a little bit of public speaking even, and a little bit of writing. And so I thought, what could I do that would incorporate all of those things? And at first I was like, oh, maybe an author, would I ever want to be an author or a public speaker? I quickly dismissed those because they're just too far outside of what I've developed for myself. But then the idea of podcast hit me, and I thought, that's perfect. That kind of combines all these things that I really do love doing. And it would be a great way to get to know other engineers in the community and build something that's interesting for other people to listen to, and probably a great marketing tool as well to boot. So that is how the Being an Engineer podcast came to be.
So, how do you come up with the ideas for the show?
I let it flow pretty organically. Typically before the show, most everyone that I interview has a pretty detailed LinkedIn page. So I'll go to LinkedIn and I'll just read through their history. Sometimes I'll visit websites that might be referenced in their LinkedIn page and kind of get to know them a little bit. And then I'll just formulate questions around those people that I think are interesting. And hopefully if they're interesting to me, they're going to be interesting to other people as well. So as I'm reading through people's backgrounds, questions just kind of organically arise. I'll learn about a project someone did, and I'll think, wow, I wonder how they did this aspect of that project. I need to ask them about that. And so that's kind of my process for coming up with questions to ask.
Cool. Do you have any favorite or very memorable episodes from the history of the show?
Yeah, there have been a few. There was an engineering manager named Trey Bobo from Edward Life Sciences, who we talked about vulnerability and mentoring, and I felt like we really connected on those items. I've always felt like to be a good communicator, which is to be a good engineer, you need to be kind of vulnerable. You need to put yourself out there. And he had much the same mindset. We talked about mentoring and mentorship. There was another one with Russ Aldridge, who is one of the co-founders at Sisu Devices. Really cool company, and he's a funny guy himself. So it was entertaining just listening to him. But then some of the projects they've worked on are just so cool. They do a lot of robotic automation with some pretty industrial applications, and just listening to some of these projects was really neat. And then there was a guy, Reed Harpham, who is a senior designer at Priority Design. And that episode, I think, hasn't been released yet, but it will be very shortly. And he just had so much experience, not only being a designer, but also working with engineering teams and organizing them. And the way that they organize their engineering teams at Priority, I thought was so fascinating that they don't really have much of a hierarchy or a formal project managers per se. That they have kind of a rotating role of a design lead, and it's not like a full-time position that someone keeps for years and years and years. It's they rotate people in and out of this role. I think once a year is what he said, and it was just really interesting listening to how other engineering firms organize their staff.
Interesting. So it's not a permanent position. They're moving
Right.
in and out.
Yeah, yeah. And I've always thought that it would be really cool if the engineer could be the project manager as well. When I started Pipeline, it was just me, about 10 years ago, and that was the case. I wore all the hats, right? I was the project manager, I was the engineer, I was the technician, I was the assembly operator, and so I did all these things myself, and it was really efficient. And I've learned that, as we're still a very small company, but there are 10 of us now. So my role is not so much the engineer anymore. It was for a long time project manager, and now it's more business development. But I learned that as the company grows, it's really hard to be as efficient as it was when it was just me. And I think part of that is because we do have a dedicated project manager now, and that's been wonderful. It's allowed me to step back and focus on some business development. But I think that anytime there's a dedicated project manager and a dedicated engineer, especially on smaller projects, which is where we tend to live, it's really hard to get that peak efficiency. So when I heard Reed talking about how they don't really have a dedicated role for that, but it's just one of the engineers that kind of fills that role temporarily, I thought, oh, how interesting. I wonder how we could incorporate that as well.
What led you to start pipeline design and engineering way back when?
Oh, that's a great story. I got laid off. I got laid off in 2009, I think it was, summer of 2009. So it was during the recession, and I'd like to say that it was just because of the recession. And times were tough for a lot of companies, and they had to make some changes, and I got chopped. And that's partially true, but it's also very much true that I was just not very engaged in my role back then. Looking back, I've looked back a lot on this, trying to understand why that was. And I think a large part of it is just something I partially understood back then, but not fully, is that I have an entrepreneurial spirit in me. And just sitting at someone else's desk, doing what someone else told me to do, which I'm not saying is a bad thing in any way, but for me, it was hard for me to sit in that role. As opposed to creating something of my own. So I wasn't terribly engaged towards the end of my stint at that company, and the people there were bright individuals. They recognized that, and the economy was bad anyway. They did need to make some changes, so I think it was a pretty easy call that I was the one on the chopped block. Um, After that, I thought about going into different things like commercial real estate and web design, and really very different things than engineering. Ultimately came back and realized that I already had all this experience in engineering. Maybe I can still do it, but in a way that makes me happier. And that's when I started going out looking for some small contract gigs on my own, got a few things, and it just kind of rolled from there, yeah, that's how Pipeline started.
What advice would you have for someone who may be in a similar position? They're sitting there at a job where they like their coworkers, they like the company, but they're not really that engaged, and they know there might be something more out there for them.
Yeah, I think it's critical to be really, really honest with yourself about what it is you want in life. Not even just what you want out of your profession, but what are you trying to accomplish in life? This is something that I have slowly learned over the years, and I think I'm still learning it. But your job is just one compartment of your life, and it's a big compartment, granted, but it's just one compartment in the shelf that makes up your life. And to be able to take a step back and ask yourself, what is it that I really want or need in life to be happy, is something that I think not a lot of us do, and I think that we should. And so before deciding, what you want to do as far as work, I think decide what you want to do as far as life, and then reverse engineer your way from there into, okay, what kind of job, what kind of career is going to facilitate or support the life goals that I have.
Awesome. That is really, really good advice. Now, looking out over the next year or so for both pipeline design and engineering and for the Being an Engineer podcast, any big things on the horizon? Any big changes?
We'll see. COVID has certainly had an impact. I'd say we're a little bit less busy now than we have been in the past. Although it hasn't been catastrophic. I think that we've been blessed in many ways. Our focus is working with medical device engineering teams,
Mhm.
and medical device companies. They've all still been going even during COVID. So as opposed to a lot of retail companies, which have really been hit hard, most of our customers are still going, which means we're still going. So that's been a huge blessing. However, we during the COVID, the past 3-4 months, I've spent a lot of my time on sales and marketing, even more than I had before the pandemic hit. And it feels like there is an avalanche of work just on the horizon. All of these relationships that we've developed over the past 3, 4, 5 months, we're starting to see people come back, projects materialize, and I see some real growth in our future over the next year. I would not be surprised if we were to add 20-30% capacity to our existing team. And that probably comes with some new equipment, some new space maybe. So I'm very excited about the next year, and really do feel very positive about it.
Excellent. Well, Aaron, I hope those trends continue. And thank you so much for joining us today. You can check out Aaron's company. We'll put the URL there on the screen for you. And we really thank you for joining us on the show.
You bet. Thank you for having me, Aaron.
All right, that's it for today's episode of Ok Zoomer. We'll be back with another one in a couple more days. Thanks for watching, everybody.